we have embarked on a journey of reading the Science of Mind book just a little bit at a time. A few pages, a few paragraphs, a meditation here and there, but right out of the book. And every day is outlined what we get to read. What I'm loving about this process is that we get to read from different parts of the book. Therefore, A, it's not boring, page to page to page. And B, it just makes the book, for me at least, come alive in such a way that I begin to really understand the nature of God, the nature of life. I begin to really pick up what Ernest Holmes has been talking about and what it is that we've been teaching in terms of science of mind principles, who we are, how we got to be, this thing called the perfect universe. And let's get impersonal. So I love transparency. When I created the talk title for today, I thought we were reading from totally different pages. And I was going to talk about the impersonal nature of God. However, today's reading is about the perfect universe. And you know what? In the perfect universe, there's an impersonal nature of God. It does not pick and choose. I'm going to shine on these people today, and you folks, you don't get so much shine today. It's totally impersonal. The nature of God is its pure perfection, and it is the same constantly for everything and for all things, because everything is indeed that life that God is. As a matter of fact, when I was reading the lesson for today, I was so taken by just the simplicity of it, but wondering, gosh, if we were to actually practice this thing, if we were to really, really take it on in such a way that day in, day out, minute in, minute out, breath in, breath out, heartbeat going, each beat, heartbeat at a time, if we were to really grasp and understand and recognize and incorporate and live from this place, where could we possibly be? It reminds me of a gymnast. A gymnast who maybe is doing the bar. The Olympics are happening in the world, the Winter Olympics. And I think about the practice that it takes for these athletes, the dedication that it takes. And if we were to even have a fraction of their dedication and practice, even just a fraction of how they practice, if we were to just translate that into our science of mind practice, into our spiritual practice, what kind of spiritual athletes would we be? We could probably do somersaults and fly and trapeze and, really, we could probably really achieve some awesome feats. And as I was reading it, today's particular reading, he starts off by saying that we must seek to realize the spiritual universe regardless of any condition which appears, if we would embody the great goodness. So here's the deal. I want to embody the great goodness. What does it mean to embody the great goodness? It means that it is who and what I really am, that I am it, that when you see me, you see the great goodness, and that I experience the great goodness. Now, just by a show of hands, how many people want to experience great goodness? Exactly. So coming at it from the other end, coming at it from, let's say, the back door, so if we would embody the great goodness, what is it that we must do in order to embody this great goodness? What is our task at hand so that we might live from this great goodness, that we might speak from this great goodness, that we might live from this great goodness, that when you see us, you see this great goodness? What is our task at hand? And he says we must, and must is a 4-letter word, we must seek to realize the spiritual universe. We must seek to realize it. We must seek to know it. We must seek to recognize that we live in a spiritual universe, regardless of any conditions that appear. So what happens for us in this human experience is that we are indeed God. We are indeed the way God expresses and lives in the human form. Trees are the way God expresses in tree form. And trees are simply treeing. They're not trying to be anything else. They're not trying to be a plant. They're not trying to be a flower. They're simply being their tree self. And they're recognizing and knowing that they are God as tree, and simply being in its majesty, simply providing shade or fruit or whatever it is that this tree's purpose is. For us, we have an opportunity to experience the great goodness to the degree in which we know and realize the spiritual universe is who and what we are. That we recognize that God is living as us, where we know now that there's no separation, there's nothing. You know, sometimes that expression is, he got away by the skin of his teeth. And there's no skin really on the teeth. There might be a little glaze or enamel. Do we have a dentist in the house? Right? But to that degree, where there is no separation, where I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that my life is that life of God. That there's nothing, no thing that can separate us. That there's no division, nothing. I know that there's these great scriptures and great books that say that God is closer to me than my neck vein. And that's really close. Than my neck vein. That God is so close, closer than my neck vein, and that is because God is who and what I am. You can't get any closer than I am it. And to the degree in which we recognize that, we get to live and experience the great goodness that is the perfection of God as us. What we get to do, though, and here's the rub or the challenge, is that regardless of any condition which appears. Now, as we are experiencing life as human being human, we get to experience an apparent or a perceived duality where we name things good or bad, up or down, where we perceive opposites. It's just the nature of living as being human or human being. And it's just the laws that govern this particular planet, this particular aspect of the cosmos. The thing is that we allow ourselves to be fooled or to be bamboozled or taken on a ride, and we begin to believe that what we experience in this human form is truth, and we forget what is the truth. We forget that life is eternal. When we hear of wars and reports of wars, when our beloved ones shed the mortal coil and move on, we forget that life is eternal. We forget that our life is the life of God. We forget that love is all that there really is. We forget that peace that is who and what we are, because it is God, and we are the way God is expressing in this human form. And so when we allow the conditions of this existence to skew or to act as a filter or to act as what it is that we believe, when we allow that to get in the way, we cannot realize our great goodness. We cannot recognize and realize and live from this place of divine order and perfection and clarity and abundance and peace and harmony and wholeness, because we've allowed the world of effects to say, I'm bigger than God. When indeed we get to go, my life is the life of God, and this experience, this condition is simply happening in this human realm. It's simply happening here, but it is not the truth of my allness. It is not the truth of who you are. When we look at one another and we look at one another with fault or judgment, what we're saying is God is not living as you. And that's a lie. When we're arguing and fussing and fighting or cursing somebody out or simply not necessarily in cooperation with other human beings, what we're saying is, you're not God enough for me. When we turn the other way, and I'm just so above that right now. You know, I can't spend time with the little people. We're saying that they're not enough God. And if that's what we're saying in effect, then we're not realizing the spiritual universe in its entirety, in its wholeness. And we are allowing conditions, even our own condition of elitism or spiritual bypass or anything of the sort, to skew who we really are, to think that we could possibly ever be above anything or anyone else, instead of realizing and recognizing that we are one, that God is living perfectly and beautifully as each and every one of us, and that no one is above the other or below the other. And we get to realize that, and to the degree in which we get to realize that, we get to really live from our goodness, we get to live from our greatness. But until then, we continue to be in bondage. Bondage of what? Bondage of self-centeredness, selfishness, ego. And I'm talking about the ego that's edging God out, not the ego that's entertaining God only. We begin to fall prey to judgment, resentment. We begin to fall prey to, I'll never amount to anything, or you're not worth anything. We begin to fall prey to these conditions, and then we fail to realize and recognize the truth of who we are, which is that it's all impersonal. God is living perfectly, beautifully, magnificently as each of us. So, since we have this quote-unquote human experience as spiritual beings, what is the remedy, if you will? I love the way the first people, Native Americans, the way they speak, because, you know, they will say, so what's the medicine? I mean, in our Western society, medicines always means drugs, you know, like, you know, prescription. But in Native culture, in First People culture, they speak about, what's the remedy? What's the medicine? What must I engage in? What must I know in order to rid myself from looking at the condition and recognizing the spiritual universe and recognizing myself as this power and this presence and this life that is God, so that I may live from that place, that I may redistribute my good, that I might be the place that others can see my light and recognize their own light. Not that their light is dim, not that their light is shining brighter, but that folks might see my light, that they might recognize their own light. Like, oh, look at how beautiful you are. When I see the beauty in others, it's because it lives in me. I'm simply seeing the reflection in me. So, what is it that you're saying and speaking into existence about others? Because whatever it is that you're saying, you're really saying it about yourself. Oops. Some of us get to change our language around here. Some of us, instead of nitpicking and constantly cutting people down to size or pushing people down or oppressing or doing things to, you're never any good, you're not going to be anything, instead of doing that behavior, which is really what we're doing to ourselves, we get to look and go, wow, what I do to you is really what I'm thinking and feeling about myself, and it is not the truth of who we are. So the medicine is to look at and to recognize our way of being with one another. Because our way of being with one another, if we take a look at it, is how am I being with God as Cindy? You know? How am I being with God as Miriam? How am I being with God as Jim? How am I being with God as Cole? Because to the degree in which I recognize that God is living through and as everyone, each and every one of us, there's only one relationship, and that's the relationship with God, the way God shows up as everything in our life. Is that making sense? Right? So later on, he says, I love this. He says, so to daily meditate on the perfect life and to daily embody the great ideal is a royal road to freedom. Daily. To daily meditate, to daily embody. I was watching a TED Talk, and I think I'm liking those instead of watching television. You know, like go on YouTube and watch these TED Talks or these inspirational messages. And I was watching this woman, and she was talking about how we say change your thinking, change your life. So she was pretty much coming from this whole perspective of how our bodies can change our minds. We usually think if I change my mind, I can change my body. I'm going to go to the gym today. And so, I take myself to the gym. So she has this idea, and it works out perfectly and beautifully because it's all in divine order, that if we change our body, we actually can change our mind. And the way that it works is that she had people in this experiment take on these stances. So you take on a power stance, like the Wonder Woman stance. And so she had people stand like this for 2 minutes. And it's just a simple body stance. But imagine standing this way for 2 minutes. And because it's a power pose, the body now begins to kind of go, oh yeah. And the mind begins to say, yeah, I'm pretty powerful. Yeah, and if you do it in front of a mirror, it's like, hey, I'm kind of sexy right there. Just kidding. But all of a sudden now, because we've taken the stance for 2 minutes, the body is now changing the mind. It's kind of like, we begin to feel differently about ourselves. And to the contrary, she had people standing in poses of weakness or shut downness for 2 minutes. And just even watching the sense of feeling introverted and don't look at me and feeling less than and weak. So when Ernest Holmes talks about embody the great ideal, meditate on the perfect life, that this is the royal road to freedom, it reminded me of the TED Talk, because what is it to me? What are the stances? How is it that I personally, because for each person is going to be different, depending on where we are on our growth and on our road to unfoldment and to freedom from all discord. So what does embody mean to me? What are the stances that I take? What are the things that I do for myself? How is it that I utilize my body? How is it that I utilize my mind to really then begin to recognize that my life is the life of God, period. And to really take that on, to really learn that, to really embody it. He says, let us learn to see God. Let us learn to see as God must. God must see a certain way because God is perfection, so God can only see perfection. So let us learn to see as God must see. Let us learn to look for and to see the perfection of everything, the perfection of the universe. Ernest Holmes speaks in this particular passage that if the universe was imperfect, that it would not exist. In that split second, that it would not exist, because imperfection dissolves into the nothingness from which it came. But even with scientists telling us that the global warming and this and that, it is still a perfect universe, and that everything is, it's like clockwork. Everything is orbiting, doing its thing. It's perfect. Perfect universe, perfect God, perfect me, perfect life. It's in its perfection, even with the changes that mankind might go, oh, there's something wrong. But even with destruction, what we might label as wrong, or, oh my gosh, something bad has happened, even with that destruction is actually the melting away of something so that something else can be birthed from it. We may not know the bigger plan, the bigger picture, but in our minute state of humanity, in our finite state of humanity, we might label it as wrong, and that's why he urges us that to disregard the condition, but to know the perfection of life, because we don't know the huge picture, the bigger picture. And what we might be labeling as wrong or bad or judging is just part of the perfection that is God. It's part of the eternal life that is love. It is part of who we are. We are part of it. God is at the center of all, and the center is everywhere. So we are living and having our beingness in God, and it is indeed perfect. And finally, he says, let us seek the good and the true and believe them with our whole heart, even though every man we meet is filled with suffering and limitation appears at all sides. We cannot afford to believe in imperfection for a single second. For how long? A single second. We cannot believe or afford to believe in imperfection even for a single second. To do so is to doubt God, and is to believe in a power apart from God, to believe in another creator. So let's daily say to ourselves, say this with me, or I'm going to say it and then you say it for yourself. Perfect God within me. Perfect life within me, which is God. Come forth into expression through me as that which I am. That gets to be our daily mantra. Perfect God within me. Perfect life within me, which is God. Come forth into expression through me as that which I am. That gets to be what we focus on a daily basis, recognizing that there's nothing personal about God in the sense of God likes me, but God don't like you. That the impersonal nature of God is that God is living in, through, and as each and every one of us. And that to the degree in which we recognize that, to the degree in which we're steadfast and we practice that, to the degree in which we utilize it and are like an Olympian or an athlete that wants to go to the Olympics and studies and practices and practices and practices. Imagine walking and just saying, perfect God within me with every step. Perfect God within me. Perfect God within me. Perfect God within me. To the degree in which we believe it without a shadow of a doubt. To where we recognize that less and less I'm believing in imperfection and believing more in the perfection of the universe. And believing that everything is in fact in divine order right now. Not later, but that everything is in divine order right now. It's a huge task. And believe me, I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't gotten there yet. The great news is that we're on a path together. And some are a little bit more ahead than others, but we're on the path. We're on the path, and as we continue to encourage one another, to empower one another, to lift one another up, to recognize and call one another by our real name, God, life, love, divine beauty, love intelligence, eternal life, creativity, harmony, peace, abundance, as we begin and continue to call each other by our divine name, and recognize the divinity and the perfection in each and every one of us, to the degree in which we do that in spiritual community, as we grow together, as we go forward together, we begin to recognize and we begin to live from that place of the great goodness that is our life. Everything unfolds in perfect and divine order. All of a sudden, things that seem to be problems seem to melt away when we recognize the perfection of life. And to the degree in which we do that, to the degree in which we know that, we live our divine life free from discord, free from all discord, which is what Ernest Holmes talked about and what we believe. He says, I believe that we can achieve freedom from all discord. Imagine that. Imagine where we as a people can be when we're free from all discord. And it starts here, and it starts now. So the invitation is to simply go into a time of stillness and of silence. And that as you prepare your heart space for that time of stillness and silence, that it's almost like we're asking this internal power and presence and life that is our very life. We're asking God to simply lead us to that path of perfection, to help us to see only good, to help us to recognize and realize that God is within us. Perfect God is within me. Perfect life is within me. So as you gently close your eyes, or if you're more comfortable leaving them open, just simply pick something to focus on, whether it's a crease in your hand or a soft gaze upon the floor. We simply dedicate this time right here, right now, to a knowing of a greater truth. We simply surrender and let go of everything we thought we knew about life, about God, about love. And we simply become open to a new experience. So as we allow the doors of our hearts to simply be made open and available, we examine our hearts. We see that the kingdom of God is within. Therefore, the love, the joy, the peace, the abundance, the clarity, the divine beauty and creativity, the harmony and infinite intelligence and divine order that is God is living in us, within us right now. And we are having our beingness and our livingness in God. Perfect life within me. Perfect love within me. I am what thou art, and thou art that which I am. We simply begin to recognize the perfection that is life, living in, through, and as us. Living around us. This wholeness, this beauty, we recognize that right where I am, God is. God is living me. I turn away from the conditions, the world of effects, and I see perfect life, perfect God, perfect me now. And I allow that to infiltrate my thought, my being. And I simply embody that right now. I let it be.